Hi, and welcome to AXSchat. We're delighted to have Lexy Martin with us today. Lexi's from Visier and is been invited by Antonio. So, Lexy, we're always welcoming people to talk about the work they're doing around inclusion. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and the work you're doing?
Sure. So I'm a researcher, and actually my main focus has always been to look at the adoption of technology and the value that it brings to organizations. But I work for Visier, and Visier has a lot of customers, and we have this great database of about 350,000 employees that are the workforce of about 100 different organizations. And so we can look at this data and look at different trends in the workforce. We've looked at one on gender equity, and we've just recently published this new report on ageism in the tech industry. So that's what I am going to talk about today.
Great topic.
Okay. What we set out to do was to answer the question as to whether ageism really exists at a systemic level. The ageism defined as the prejudice or discrimination on the basis of a person's age. And so we actually found some interesting results. I mean, yes, ageism does exist in the tech industry. And what I mean by the tech industry are software companies, software development companies, data processing, communications organizations. And about a quarter of our database, the employees work for tech companies, and the rest work in industries like financial services and healthcare and manufacturing, retail, and so forth. And so if you look at those two categories of workers, the workers in tech are about 5 years younger in age than their counterparts in the other industries, whether we're looking at the total workforce or managers. So yes, it exists, and it exists in terms of hiring practices. But we also found some kind of interesting things. One is that that workers over 40 actually are more often designated as top performers. So their maturity and their experience is really valued. But nevertheless, ageism does exist, and it's an issue that needs to be addressed. I think employers need to care about ageism for a number of reasons. First being that there's been a lot of age discrimination lawsuits. I don't know about in the UK or Ireland as much, but certainly in the United States, in Silicon Valley, organizations like HP and Cisco and Apple and Google have lawsuits against them, and more lawsuits than gender or ethnicity, which I find very interesting. So it's a very timely topic in the United States, and we've all got friends that have stories, but our data actually shows that the hiring practices. Ageism really does exist. I don't want to just ramble on here. If you've got questions, please jump in.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, and
go on, Deborah. You go first.
What I'd like you to do, Lexy, if you don't mind, and Neil, thank you for letting me go first since I accidentally stepped on you there. But is ground the numbers a little bit. So I know that, of course, we do a lot of litigation here in the United States, but when you talk about ageism, what age are we talking about here? And are we talking about it because even the corporations that you mentioned are global corporations? And so what are we talking about here? And of course, here at AXSchat, we talk a lot about these issues, technology, but empowerment of people with disabilities. And we know that as we age, more of us acquire disabilities. As a matter of fact, our AARP here in the United States, I read a study years ago that said over the age of 65, 46% of Americans will have disabilities. So the two issues really meld together. And of course, when you talk about ageism, just like when you're talking about disabilities, you have all of these other diversity groups that go across. We all age, hopefully. But women do, men do, people of different gender preference, all, religious, all of the other diversities go into this. So can we just for a moment sort of talk about the age that we're talking about? I'm a baby boomer, and so I assume I'm in there, but I just thought maybe round that.
Yeah, sure. So for the purposes of this research, we looked at the workforce in terms of millennials born between 82 and 95, Gen Xers 1965 to 1981, and then baby boomers 1946 to 1964. I'm actually, I think I'm called the forgotten few. I'm 73. So, I'm really on the outer reach of.
How fun.
Why is it that people say congratulations?
Because 73 is a cool age. I'm not there yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So
yeah, I just couldn't stay retired. I retired at 70, and I have always loved what I did. So I now work part-time, and I'm really enjoying it. But anyway, so for the purposes of this report, interestingly, ageism is considered for age 40 and above.
Wow. Okay.
Now, I think that's
we're all in there.
So we're all in there. A lot of us are in there. But we actually did look at millennials versus Gen Xers versus baby boomers.
Thank you. Neil?
Well, within my own organization, we've got 5 generations in the workforce, but and one of our previous guests actually had some similar statistics which said that really discrimination cuts in around age 43. Wow. So I'm still in that bracket. So it's interesting for me that it happens so early. Because in many ways, you think, in your 40s, you think about the execs, they're all in their 40s and 50s. You think of people being in the prime of their careers, and yet you're saying that this is a blocker. Now, I'm curious, because you were talking about Apple and corporations that are developing software. Do you see there being a difference between those kind of technology companies and other maybe more traditional technology companies that are not so much developing software but delivering services? Is there some kind of a split between the two? Because certainly when I look at CVs and job applications and adverts, companies that are developing new software are almost living on the assumption that they can only get innovation from the young.
Yeah, well, like I said, so the tech industries, the Apples, the Googles, the Facebook, the LinkedIns, they're considered tech industries. And that's what we were looking at, them compared to everybody else. So yes, they are younger, an average of 5 years younger for both the workforce in general and managers. So the workforce in general, the average tech worker is 38 years old compared to 43 in all other industries. And then for managers, the average age is 42 years compared to 47 for the non-tech industries. So yes, the tech industries are younger, and there is systemic hiring practices in place. Where I read a couple of days ago the criticism of Facebook, Google, and LinkedIn that they were actually posting job ads where if you looked into why you were receiving them, because you're the age of 18 to 38, and this was an ad placed by Verizon, so specifically going after, a particular age group. Now, that ad has since been taken down. Facebook has come on, back and said, look, your marketing efforts need to cover the breadth of the potential workforce. But ads online are about the same as, where you put your advertising in magazines. And, if you're only putting your advertising in magazine that appeals to a younger workforce, why can't you do that online as well?
So, considering that today all companies, they seem somehow say that they are proud in the way how they use data in many different areas, in the way how they improve customer service for their customers, in the way how they operate themselves. So considering that we have all this data about individual performance, why do you think they are somehow still ignoring this type of data in order to be more successful as companies and actually be more inclusive in order to reflect the products that they develop in the society that they are in?
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it seems to me that we need to have a workforce that is reflective of our customer base. I think about Facebook and Google and LinkedIn, and they have such young workforces, and yet their customers are equally, if not more, distributed into older age. And I can't understand, why they don't have more reflective of that older workforce. I mean, that older user base. At Visier, we actually really understand this, that we deal with decision makers that are older. So we hire salespeople that are older, that are more copacetic with, older workforce. The people who are implementing technology in our customers are older. So we look for solution consultants that are older to really be, reflective of who we serve. I mean, and that's the way I think it should be. But, there's developer communities and all these tech organizations, and and they're such a big part of the tech industry, and they bring the average age down.
No, I've been spent all my weekend in an hackathon where I've met a lot of the people that you were talking about. Those are actually some older people here, but the main group was on that age. And then I look and observe the product that they were trying to develop, and look at the level of maturity of the presentations. And sometimes I have this feeling that they should have asked more questions in relation to the world that is around them, and sometimes when they present, they realize they see the world in a very narrow perspective, and there are a few things that they miss regarding what they could actually deliver. What do you think that we talk about innovation and diversity, and there are some studies that relate diversity to innovation. What do you think that these companies might be missing by ignoring that age group? How could that reflect in the way how can be more or less innovative?
Well, sure. I mean, the older workforce is obviously more experienced. I think that we're always looking for people who have experience, but it seems like employers also want them to be younger. And instead, you actually have to hire an older workforce to have the experience that you're looking for.
Deborah? Sorry. Go on, Anthony.
So it's quite useful at work to have mentors. Do you think that the fact that they don't have people with a certain age can create a problem in relation of having mentors in the workplace?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I quite got the question.
Considering that they have such a young workforce, would that put a problem in terms of mentorship?
Of course. Of course. When I joined Visier, the head of development asked me to mentor a younger person in our development group that actually wanted to do some research. I mean, they could have hired somebody who's younger to do research, but I've done it for a long time, and I, know a lot about what I'm doing. So it was really, a match made in heaven. She does some things for me much faster than I ever want to do. And, I've got a lot of experience, a lot of connections, and can, definitely make those introductions and, give her a little bit of the voice of experience. And I think that's the same in any organization. If you've got older developers, they've made mistakes in developing multiple times. So they can tell their younger peers, what else they need to be doing, and give them the experience that they have from having made those mistakes. You haven't made enough of those if you're, under 30.
I think that there are, of course, this is a multidimensional problem. And as somebody that has been in the workforce a long time myself, and I saw the ageism has always been a problem. I've talked about this before, but I remember working with a woman. I was in the banking industry, and she was she was married, but she had decided not to have children, and she'd committed her life to this bank. And at the age of 55, she was not ready to retire, and she was very smart and sound. But I saw younger counterparts aggressively push her out. And I remember watching it and thinking, wow, I see so many things wrong with that. But I think some of what's happening with the ageism is because of behaviors that maybe some of us that now are experiencing ageism maybe did whenever we were younger. And all I'm saying is that I think it's time for all of us to understand that regardless of our age, our gender, who we love, once again, all the diversity things, whether or not we have a disability, that we're human beings that have, value. And it is, I know we sort of, you were talking about the mentoring and stuff, but I have people that work with me that are very young, that have walked very, very difficult lives, and things that in my world, I don't think somebody should have to walk at the tender age of 24. And so at 24, some of these people are more mature than some of my friends that are in their 70s. And so also I think another thing that we've learned as society is that, you go and you work till you're 55, and then you retire, and you go and you sit on the couch and, you watch television or whatever that we had planned. And the baby boomers are like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And older as well.
Right.
We want to continue to contribute, right? Go ahead, Lexy.
No, I was just going to say, not only do people want to continue to contribute, some of them, need to continue to work.
Right,
but
right. Especially with the financial crisis that we have.
Yeah, and with the talent crisis that we have.
Correct.
Sorry if I interrupted. You said the same thing. It just seems like if one wants to continue to contribute, they should be able to. And yet there are hiring practices that are eliminating, the opportunity for older workers to get jobs. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Deborah. Please continue.
No, because I think you bring up a really good point, because, we're having a free flow conversation. But I think that, I think that there's a lot of reasons why we're here. And some of it is obvious ageism, but some of it is just misunderstandings of who we are as individuals at different times and ages in our lives. And so I think the opportunity now is, instead of deciding that somebody doesn't add value, because I'll give you an example. I'm not hearing this as much, but I'm somebody in their 50s that loves social media. And for years, I've heard, oh, social media is only for young people. You're not hearing that as much. And I remember being at a conference, and this young woman in her early 20s stood up in a room full of a lot of people around my age, and she said, well, I know none of y'all understand anything about social media, so if you want to know something, just let me know. And I thought, well, in the first place, she had 50 followers, and so I didn't think she knew a lot about social media. But I think we have to stop judging each other and deciding we're not as valuable anymore because, take your pick, because you have a disability, because you have red hair, right.
We need to know what each other can contribute and be respectful of that.
Yes, and advertising different places. It's fascinating because all the marketing stuff is shifting and changing, Lexy, right? So how do we do it? Yeah. And I know Neil wants to weigh in, so let me
I think Lexy wants to had one final point first. Did you not?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Neil.
So I mean, the thing that Deborah was saying about the social media, that kind of attitude is how we end up with multinational companies having an intern running their social media and causes some of the disasters because they're not socially aware. They know how to, but they don't understand the bigger picture. Not every intern is going to be terrible, but essentially people have these preconceptions about which roles should be fulfilled by youth and technology, etc. But what we've got to remember is that software has been around for a long time now. The people that are these older generations actually have been programming software. It's not like so I can understand how the prejudice came to be, because originally there was no software programming industry, and so you needed to be young because it was a new industry and the pioneers were all young. But they're now all old guys. They're all the older people. They're the people that were programming, the first operating systems, the first banking systems, and everything else are absolutely, at the later stages of their careers, and so therefore the need to be young to do software, to really get it, is no longer there.
I started programming in the 60s, and I've worked in tech industries for, I guess, over 50 years now. I think, though, that there is criticism against older people not being able to kind of keep up with new technology. But, I just keep seeing that not really being true. I think to the extent that people are passionate about what they do, they just keep learning. And, that's older people. I don't know how much more time we have here, but there are a couple of things I'd like to say about of an organization like ours that has analytics solutions, and the importance of organizations being able to, assess whether or not they have age equity issues. Analytics is an important aspect of any organization's operations these days, to see if you could, potentially be at risk for lawsuits. And then, I think it's also important that we not only just look at, our workforce in the aggregate and what the age is, but look more deeply into how are our teams comprised? Do we have age equity, gender equity, ethnicity equity, our teams, as well as, at the aggregate level? Because, there's a lot of evidence that diversity really leads to higher financial performance.
Yeah, I think that whilst maybe in certain other geographical locations we're less likely to get litigious about this stuff, there are still definitely quotas and tax penalties for not meeting that diversity in the workforce. I also think that some of the things that are happening now are quite interesting. So, for instance, people are having more than one career. So one of the things that we've done recently is we've been doing a lot of in terms of apprenticeships, and we're actually we've removed age limits on apprenticeships. So an apprenticeship is no longer something for someone that's straight out of school. It's also applicable for someone that wants to change their career and
I
maybe
love
have a
that.
second career.
One of the guys that I talked to when we were developing this research was a fellow who had been laid off at Hewlett Packard, and he had a lot of trouble getting another job. And he finally apprenticed with a beer maker, and now he's opening his own brewery, and very happy as a craft brewer. I mean, we don't all get to apprentice in that environment, but I think we should have that opportunity.
No, I
agree. That would be fun. The movie The Intern addressed this.
I love that. Yeah,
I loved that show too. I think Dustin Hoffman, which is a favorite actor, and coming in and wearing a suit, and it just was beautifully done. It wasn't an insult to no young person. It was done very tastefully. And
yeah, De Niro. Yeah, Robert De Niro.
I always do that. I always mix those two, and they're both
Hathaway. Yeah,
and Anne Hathaway was so. I thought they did a beautiful job of how.
What that really showed was how much we need each other.
Yes.
She needed his wisdom, his maturity, his experience so desperately.
And telling her, because of all of his experience, Lexy, that she was ready and to stop doubting herself as a young woman because others were telling her to. So that goes back to the mentoring comment that you and Antonia were talking about. I
think it also, I'm sorry, it also comes back to something that I think happens as we age, that we start to doubt ourselves. Basically we're just seeing what we're good at and what we're not good at. And sometimes we're asked to do things we're not good at. And then we start doubting ourselves. I have terrible spatial relationship capability. Getting things to work on 2 screens is almost beyond me. It's just something I'm not good at. So what? It doesn't mean I'm stupid. It doesn't mean I'm not a technology person. I just can't do that one thing. So, why can't we partner with people who maybe are good at that?
Right. And focus on our strengths.
Exactly.
So, Neil?
Yeah, no, focusing on strengths is hugely important. He says trying to work out which screen he's meant to be looking at. I think it's been a really fascinating chat today. It's a topic that's going to continue to be of great importance for decades to come.
I have a number of friends who head diversity programs at companies like Cisco and SAP, and it's kind of next on their agenda.
Yeah. It has to be, because we're not going to have the pyramids like this in terms of the population. It's inverted. But in 1960 there were 2 young people for every older person. By 2060 in Europe it's going to be 3 elder people for every young person. I hope I've got it the right way around. We can check on Eurostat, but effectively the pyramid has been reversed. So they're going to have to engage with the older generations, keep people working, keep people fit and healthy and engaged. My final point before we finish, and I do need to thank Barclays for supporting us as always with AXSchat, is around the point that you made about technology, and that we feel that we've got to keep up all the time. What I hear from younger people that I'm mentoring is actually they struggle with it too. Yeah, because actually the rate of change is so rapid, the proliferation and fragmentation of technologies is so enormous that no one can do everything. I think that we just fear that we're being left behind, or that we're not good at something because there's too much, and so we need to cut ourselves a bit of slack sometimes. If there's anything you want to say before we close, I'll hand it to you. If not, we'll.
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested in the research that really definitively looks at ageism in the tech industry versus non, we've got a research report. It's available for free. Please, avail yourselves of it.
Oh, and what we'll do is we'll share that on our website.
Yeah, and Lexy, I know that you had a presentation prepared. If you want to, if you don't mind sharing that, we could also put a link to that on the website.
Perfect.
Definitely information we're interested in. So we appreciate it.
And thank you for asking me. This isn't my, area of research. I think they made me the poster child for this particular report because I'm older, but, I really, these are worldwide problems. And we have a database, that has organizations that are worldwide. So it's been really interesting to see, that this is a problem worldwide. And I don't know if it has the same legal ramifications in, your countries, but it certainly does in the United States. And it's something we need to address. And besides, diverse teams outperform.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and the laws do, the laws in theory do protect people from this kind of discrimination, but it still happens anyway. Right. Thank you so much, Lexy. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.